Welcome to the Entree Pastors Podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello there, and welcome to the Entree Pastors Podcast on YouTube. My name is John Sanders. I'm one of the co-hosts of the show, and we're really excited to introduce you to the guest on this week's episode. His name is Scott Hall, and he pastors an incredible church down in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, actually in Kellar, Texas. And we're titling this episode, this is episode number 103, the title is When the Church Embraces the Marketplace. You're going to hear Scott talk about how the church that he leads has really done exactly that, where they have inspired and supported and encouraged so many entrepreneurs to go out into the marketplace and launch businesses. They actually have an incubator for business startups within their church or as a part of their church. And they're seeing a lot of kingdom fruit as a result of what their church is doing in the marketplace and how they're embracing the marketplace. If ever there is a theme that connects with the message of Entree Pastors, it is this. And so I'm excited to share this conversation that I had recently with Pastor Scott Hall. So sit back, enjoy, and listen to this conversation talking about when the church embraces the marketplace. Here we go.
Well, Scott, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Entree Pastors Podcast, man. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. Privileged to be with you today.
Yeah, I've truly been looking forward to getting to meet you and having this conversation. So I didn't do any of the formal stuff before the call. I just wanted to jump in and record it because I know we're going to cover some good ground together. You were introduced to me. I heard about you from our mutual friend, Dan Miller, who earlier this year spent some time with you and with your church, and he came back just with glowing reports of you and all the things going on there. So I was like, man, when I hear about a church that has a heart for the business community and is doing some stuff in that space, like I want to meet this guy, and what better place to do it than a podcast interview. So thanks, man, for your willingness to come on the show and share this. Why don't we just start with a little bit of an introduction about you? Where in the world are you serving, and what's your story? How did you get into pastoral ministry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm serving in Kellar, Texas now. We've been here. We'll be 5 years old in this church plant in November. And I was called here really on a consulting gig to help shut a church down and revitalize and relaunch. I've been in pastoral ministry for about 33 years now. And in this location, like I said, about 5 years. And really our move here after serving many years in the local church came out of a time in a prayer closet. We were in Midland, Texas, serving in a church there for about 11 years. And I prayed a prayer. I wrote a prayer actually on my wall in my closet that said, God, put me in a situation where if you don't come through, I fail. And this was the answer to that. And a part of that time as well, and I'm sure we'll dig into this a little bit more, was praying through, thinking through what it might look like to do church and church planting in a different way. Perhaps a more sustainable way for the local church, but also in a way where really the call from Jesus to thrive in discipleship could happen. And as we'll talk more about this, I believe that's happening in the marketplace and through men and women in the marketplace that understand their job as their calling. I often say to our people, I've been a pastor for 30 plus years, but my calling's not better than your calling. It's just different. I happen to drive to a church to work. The call is equal on our lives, right? All of us to go make disciples, and where our people thrive, hopefully, is in the marketplace doing that very thing.
Yeah, I recently heard a pastor saying, I don't know where he got this statistic, but he said that like in the United States, in the church in America, like 3% of the Christian population is called to work in that professional role, vocational role in the church as a full-time or part-time pastor or staff member. But that leaves 97% of the body of Christ not in that role. And his point was, your primary ministry is out there. Some of us have a ministry that is here focused on equipping the saints, but for most of the church, it's out there. So we'll keep unpacking that. But I want to just back up a minute and talk to you about this. Like, I have the gift of ADD, so I kind of chase shiny objects when I see them.
We'll do well together then.
Yeah, good. There will be no script to this whatsoever. But you mentioned, being a church planter and wanting to be different. I would push back gently to say that's every church planter, man. Everyone who plants a church says that we're going to be different. Like, we're going to be the church that is, doing something new and different. But you already alluded to it to some degree. What was it in your heart, your vision, that you saw as being, man, this is kind of outside what has become normal in, church in the Western part of the world?
Yeah, well, for me, really, the idea around that is mobilizing people in the church body to come alive in their calling and gifting. 30 years into this deal, I'm going, man, did I get it right early on as far as what is discipleship and what does that mean in the local church? And for I don't know how long, but certainly in our Western view of what church is, quite often pastors think of that as, how can I mobilize you or bring your gifting alive for the embetterment of what we do, in the church, versus saying, no, we're all working together in this global idea of making disciples of the nations for God's glory. So let's venture out and do that together. Some of that happens inside and with the local church, but the flip for me is seeing that the majority of that should happen on the day-to-day in the marketplace. And I don't know which author said this or who initially did the research. I've done my own research, and I come to about 36 miracles in the book of Acts. And only one of them happened in the synagogue or in the local church. The rest of them happened in the marketplace. And the ESV version, at least, of the scripture uses that word, in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And so the difference for us is to say, we believe the weekend ought to be the celebration of what's happened during the week as our disciple-making body of believers actually thrived in that endeavor during the week. So we're not necessarily about a bunch of programs and things like that in our church plant, as much as we are to say, God is the greatest, most proficient entrepreneur, right? Our intelligent designer. He creates us as masterpieces in Christ Jesus. So what does it really mean to understand how we're wired and gifted and then come alive in that in the day-to-day meetings at the office, right? At the conversations at the water cooler, in our own creative thinking and endeavor in business and capitalism and market capitalization, that really is, in the end, if that ROI is used correctly, benefits the kingdom. And hopefully we can talk about that and some ideas I have there. So our goal, in short, was to create an environment in a church where initially we would start incubating and launching businesses that would then pay back into a sister organization that I launched called Venture Business Impact. So we're Venture Church. I have a nonprofit called Venture Business Impact, which is focused on incubating new businesses outside of, but we're not saying we won't launch businesses in the spiritual domain or religious domain, but we really want to focus on the domains that Christians through the decades and now a couple of centuries, pushing 3, right, in the US, where we have stepped out of domains where we once had great influence, whether it's education or whatever it might be. And so we're focused on launching businesses there that create revenue streams for the church and for future business starts as well.
And the name of your church is also Venture Church, correct?
Yeah, we're called Venture Church. And, it's the Latin root is the idea of getting to a place where you make a decision where you're going to take a step forward. That's, our English definition is a daring journey. And so our tagline is follow Jesus for life. And that's a two-way play on words. One is follow him for life, right? Eternal life, but follow him for life, for crying out loud. It's like, it's not about coming in and getting comfortable as it is about opening up our hearts and minds to what Jesus might do. Oh, by the way, he said he would do exceedingly abundantly more than we could ever dream, think, or imagine. So let's press into that and see what that looks like through the expressions of our giftedness in business.
So I want you to paint a picture for our audience. I heard from Dan's, but I don't want to just assume everyone knows what we're talking about, because they've never heard of you or met you, most of them. So if I were to step on site and walk into your church and say I'm there for a few weeks, just kind of looking around and getting acclimated, I'm very familiar with normal traditional church in America, and so I kind of know what to expect going in, or at least what I think to expect going into these settings. What would I find different about Venture Church as I sit and, whether it's listening to the preaching and the vision that's being cast there, or the actual program? I mean, you're talking about a church that's intentionally launching businesses in the marketplace. I've never heard of that before. I love it. I've never heard of it. So what would I see that immediately points to this is a little different? Like, this isn't what every other church is doing.
Yeah, so a couple of different things. It's a constant stream of biblical teaching and vision dump in regards to what we believe God invites us into as far as kingdom people. And I often say this: if what we're doing today was God's idea for the church, it's failed. Yeah. And so it's more than 4 songs and a guy that speaks too long, right? And so we constantly embrace the conversation that says, and I say this all the time, we don't have pews, we have chairs, but I go old school and say the best idea is in the pew. As far as vision, for me as a pastor, the vision is Matthew 28, right? We're going to go and make disciples. The question is, what does that look like, and how does it flesh itself out? And so what you're going to constantly hear is this kind of constant, innovative kind of conversation that says, first of all, call me Scott, not Pastor Scott. Second of all, let's get a cup of coffee where we can start talking about who you are, why God made you the way that you are, and how we can come alongside you and help you flourish in that. We constantly talk about the importance of small group environments where discipleship can happen, and that our JOBs, our jobs, our callings, is God's appointment and platform of influence that he's designed for you to invite others who are never going to come to our church into discipleship with you. And so I often say to our people, and maybe this hits the editing floor, maybe it doesn't, but stop inviting people to church and invite people into your life. And then from that, maybe they come to church, but the reality is they're going to church. They're going to your church, which is you. And so you should job for that. And so there's this constant conversation for that. And then we have kind of these next step levels. A few years ago, I kind of obliterated the church idea of deacons and what deacons are. And I grew up in the church. And so, deacons played certain roles.
That's a bold move, man. That's bold.
Yeah. And those were always kind of really authoritative, positional leadership type roles with the capital D deacon. And, I always joke they were the guys that, finished up their cigarette before the sermon started and, came into the church. That's what I remember growing up. But we've become more civilized and sophisticated.
I know those guys. I've met a few, actually.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, as I searched through the scripture, that word diakonos that we use for deacon it's used of Jesus. I came not to serve, but to be served, but to serve. Same word. It's used of Peter's mother-in-law when Jesus heals her. She served him. when Jesus was tempted in Matthew chapter 4, and ministering spirits came, angels came to minister to Jesus, same word there. And so I just said to our elders and to our church body, let's stop making this about positional leadership. And so to dig into the first step, answering your question, it's kind of like, where do I go from here? There's a conversation about moving forward with business endeavor. Okay, how do I do that? Well, we can help you in the church in what we call servant leadership roles, and those are our deacons. And basically, those are your ideas given by God. Sometimes it might be an ask from leadership, but we want that to be seldom, if ever. We want people to see a need and meet a need. Because here's what I did. I went to my deacons when we had some deacons to begin with, and I said, how many of you guys like to visit hospitals when someone's sick? And out of about 16 men, not one of them raised their hand. And I said, guess what? I don't like doing that either. I'm not good at it, right? I can talk for days to thousands of people, but one-on-one in a hospital room, not my best use of my skill set. I'll do it. And so, but there are people in our body, men and women, either or in our body, that love to do that, right? So let's give them a platform to do that, and then find people to rally around them that love to do that. And so that's recently happened with a grief care, funeral type team with us, that a gentleman in our church recruited a couple other people. Now they've got 20-something people that not only take care of people walking through that stage of life in our body, we now have people in our community, because they've heard of this team, calling our team to say, walk with us. And we're hosting people and families all the way from pre-death grief care to post-death that our church is starting to become known for. I absolutely love that, right? But how can that happen even in the business sector as well? And that's where Venture Business Impact starts to partner with our church and start to see needs and meet needs in our community. So that's one step they can take. A couple of more, I'm partnered with a couple of organizations that you might know, like Faith Driven Entrepreneurs.
Yep, I've heard of them.
And so great group, and we've got a great pocket of leadership for FDE and FDI here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So I've led their foundation group, and now I'm leading their once a month entrepreneur group. And we gather entrepreneurs from in the church and all around the Metroplex. We have people driving in, and 2 folks driving in an hour each month to come sit with other entrepreneurs to find that type of community. So we're slowly in our church plant, right, being able to create these steps to inviting people into the larger conversation that's been happening. And that's the funny thing. I came out of a prayer closet in Midland, Texas, thinking I had this new way to press into church planting and creating new revenue streams for the church, only to figure out, God's inviting me to the table. They've been dining together for years, all around the world. So pretty cool there. One last thing there, we also every year take part in Lion's Den, which I don't know if you're familiar with Lion's Den or not. It's kind of a Christian Shark Tank that started in Birmingham, Alabama. Now Dallas Baptist University hosts it every year, and they've got usually about 10 to 15 pitches that they have vetted, and so they got VCs that fly in from all over the world. There's usually about 500 or 600 people at the event.
Wow!
And it's a 2-day pitch contest, and so we have sponsored and hosted tables at that as well. And our people at Venture are slowly beginning to kind of learn and attend that with us as well.
One of the things I love about what you're saying is that, especially as a church, like not everybody who comes through the door of our church is wired to be an entrepreneur necessarily. Like that's
right.
So what I'm hearing is you're not saying that we're just a church for entrepreneurs, but on that side of it, you are calling people to really figure out how God has gifted and uniquely shaped them. And ironically, it's not always to just serve inside of the 4 walls of our church. Like you're focusing them out there. Like most of what you're doing is out there, but now you really are beginning to have a place for those entrepreneurs. And I think for way too long, the church has just ignored much of business, sometimes even dismissed it. And like the message that we've sent to those in the marketplace, especially the entrepreneurs, is we have nothing for you here. I mean, unless you want to give or work in our nursery, but to really engage that and say, man, we can harness what you're doing for the gospel. And that's where the real work is being done, is out there, not so much in here. So you kind of are reaching both the natural born entrepreneur, as well as just the folks who, they might have a regular job, W-2 salary or whatever, but they're not looking at starting a new business. But you're still kind of tapping them with that entrepreneurial mindset of, how have you been gifted to go out and serve others? And you can start that. I love all of that, man. You've been doing this for 5 years as kind of this new church plant. In that time, do you have any businesses under your belt that you can kind of point to and go, our church successfully helped launch that particular business, or is this still very much kind of in the startup phase?
No, so we launched. We've got a couple of great examples and a couple of great failures as well. So we launched Venture Business Impact just before COVID hit. So great timing.
Yeah.
And so we actually, when we moved into this location, we leased more office space in a bank building, 2 floors. We leased more space than we needed staff offices for. The reason for that is we didn't see COVID coming. The reason for that was we wanted to launch a collaborative space where we could get conversations going through, crossing between different genres of business, just kingdom leaders sharpening one another. And so we hosted our launch party for this, and we had about 250 people around round tables, 13 municipalities, 4 mayors, we had congressmen, 6 head of economic developments in municipalities around us. And we had a big launch where we're going to show this office space and cast the vision and sublet all of this space, which was going to be another revenue stream for the church, and also create revenue for Venture Business Impact to incubate businesses. 2 days before that event, our office space flooded with a major, 100-year storm here. Hailstones literally through the roof. And so once we got that space fixed again, COVID hit, and so we're in a sunk cost of about $17,000 a month.
Whoa.
Church plant, sunk cost, just not a great scenario. Well, the success story that we had in the midst of that was, so we had 2 children's pastors, ministers, leaders when we launched the church. They came over from the revitalization project. And one of these, this was the first business we launched. One of these, the gentleman was a thespian by night. And so he was leading and working in the Fort Worth Community Theater at the time. And he, the previous year, was up for 36 column awards. So it's a national community theater artisan award. And he won for Cats and for Little Mermaids, best director and best actor, singer actor. For
Wow.
two different shows. And so called him in my office one day, knowing that that's really where he could thrive and would thrive. He's doing a great job for us. But I invited him in my office one day, and I said, and we have a great relationship. We've been together 2.5 years in the revitalization side of the project before we put that church to rest. And I told him, I said, the Bible says that sin is knowing the right thing to do and not do it. And I said, as a friend and as a brother in Christ, I've got to confess, I've been sinning against you. I have known the right thing to do, and I have not done it. So today's your last day of work with us.
Whoa.
And he, shock, awe, tears, weeping and gnashing of teeth, the whole thing. But I said, here's the deal. I'm going to keep paying you. And so not only am I going to keep paying you, I'm going to help you launch a business you've always wanted to launch, but you're never going to launch unless I kick you out of this nest.
Wow.
And so our first successful business, we did a whole study of our North Fort Worth area. There was no community theater up where we are. That was just killing it. And I'm talking about good art. I'm not talking about chintzy Christian theater,
Yep.
and I'm not talking about, losing the compass of morality.
Right.
But he began to do off-Broadway shows. And so I helped him. We have a 5 value add propositions for businesses that we help incubate. And really, it's those things that are quite simple, but scare people to death, that don't have that entrepreneurial know-how or even flair about them. And, it's the simple stuff with the filing with the IRS and getting your EIN and building a board, if you're a nonprofit, and working through all the legality of accounting and a lawyer, and then building a website and marketing and getting to the first POS. And so we did that. He was our first incubated business. And so I said, look, we've got 2 auditoriums we're in a storefront for a church. And so we got a room that seats about 950. We got another room that seats about 250 with a cafe and everything built into it. And so I said, here's the deal. I'll keep paying you for X amount of time. We will form your board and get everything organized. All I want you to worry about doing is being the thespian. And so I gave him our space in kind. The agreement was for a year. And so we drew up a contract. In kind, you can have all our space. So he didn't have AV, bills. He didn't have any type of rental, anything like that. He could just launch and become successful during COVID, mind you.
Wow.
So he had to have masks built in. We had limited seating to begin with. But now, and this is the whole idea of what I'm working on, he leases back now 3 years later at $5,000 a month.
Wow.
And that sunk cost that we had, our subletting is now at $10,000 a month that we have coming in, which more than that pays for all of the office space. We still have some other space that's a part of that bigger lease that doesn't cover, but I believe we can not only get there, I believe we can supersede it to where that burden's off the church. We benefit with the office space ourselves, but these revenue streams are helping out. Another successful business was with a partner that helped launch Venture Business Impact. Quick backstory is we were raising the folks that were buying our old property, which was 38 acres, 3,000 seat room, massive education space, football stadium, baseball stadium, all this crazy stuff. Deferred maintenance costs, best I could tell, $9 million. $8 million in debt. When I got there, we were $270,000 behind in short-term debt. We were 120 days behind on every bill. It was crazy. So we had to put that place to death, sell it at a discount, get in a new location, which God saw us through to do. The gentleman that was hired to raise money for the other organization used to do business plan writing for Apple back in Steve Jobs' day. Beautiful follower of Jesus. Name's Rich Manley, has a great Ripple Group entrepreneurial endeavors out of Austin, Texas. And so Rich heard this vision and he came to me about BBI and creating these revenue streams for the church and incubating businesses, hopefully getting to accelerator models. And he said, can I write a grant for you to help you launch BBI? And so he went to a VC group out in California and wrote a $150,000 grant that helped me launch Venture Business Impact. Then a gentleman that was Dean of Business, Health, and Technology for Tarrant County College, used to be a professor at UT, global entrepreneur. He stepped down from his dean seat to be my first executive director. And I mean, took a major pay cut to help launch. Wow. And so in the midst of that, he launched a business called Kingdom Ecosystems, which is it's kind of the other end of what BBI do. We're launching and incubating businesses. He's taking Kingdom business leaders and creating conversations and engaging them in a unified effort towards some of the bigger global issues that helps them not only build deal flow between the different sectors, but also to thrive, to know that this company over here at this valuation is partnering with this company to get a bigger work done for the kingdom that wouldn't get done lest they come together and work together on it. So that was our second success. We've had some software companies that didn't make it. We've had a couple of foodie type of companies that didn't make it. We've got a couple of software companies right now that I'm seated on those boards and a part of that are alive and breathing, but every once in a while we think we got to put them on the respirator. So, and those are some kind of big crazy ideas we're working through with tech. So we've had a couple of really good wins and more that didn't make it, which is the norm, of course.
Well, I love the fact that you share both, because again, welcome to business. So much of what we try as entrepreneurs doesn't work, or at least not the way we thought it would. And it's not necessarily failure. We can reframe it as learning and failing forward, as we hear people say. But that's the reality, man. Not every time we're at the plate do we hit a home run. And so I'm appreciative of hearing the reality of that. Something else that was going through my mind as I'm hearing you talk about getting these business leaders together to look at some of the larger issues in the world, and how do we work together to do that? Like, again, that's what entrepreneurs do. We solve problems. That's what we do in business. We solve problems for people. And who better to turn to than business leaders in the kingdom that are being supported and fueled by the church to go out there and figure out some of these problems. Not everything has to be done by the church directly. I love
absolutely. Absolutely. And if it is done by the church, I can say this because I've worked in the church all my life. We don't do the best job.
Yeah.
And here's why. It's guys like me or whoever the leader is. It's my fault. It's their fault. And I'm just trying to change that. And here's what I mean by that. For years, ever since the beginning of my ministry days, I look at the local church and it's running on one cylinder at best.
Yep.
And I think one of the issues, or the main issue, is that people see the paid staff, whomever it is, as the professionals, right, or whatever. And I always tell our people this: our church will thrive when businessmen and women don't check their business acumen at the door when they come in.
Praise God.
Right? Because that's what I think church people that work in the church think they should do. We got all the answers. You come in, listen to us, sing a few songs, and then go back and do what you do. And let's call that good. Well, that's not good. Actually, it's the enemy. And so I want to be the kind of church, even with the failures, like you said, where people are dreaming, right? You don't even have to be an entrepreneur to dream.
Right.
Dream and then share that with the innovator, and then partner alongside with them. Just get active in something that's helping move the ball down the field. And so this idea of businessmen and women who kill it in the marketplace day after day, week after week, year after year, and then retire. How about bring that in and let's have those conversations that are deeply spiritual, right?
Yes.
If we look at it the right way, bring those in and let's talk about it. And by the way, I'm going to shut my mouth as the capital P pastor or whatever, and I'm going to let you lead out on this because you're great at it, right? And the other side of that equation is true. I had a friend I was sharing that idea with recently, and he said, "Yes, Scott, but the other side of that coin is true as well." And I never really thought about it this way. He said, these businessmen and women who have this business acumen, they come into our churches, check it at the door. The reality is, when they go back into the marketplace, they are spiritual studs, but they check that spiritual acumen at the door. And so, man, what I'm about adventure and with VBI is I don't believe in secular and sacred, right? It's all God's. It's whether or not we choose to use it in a deeply spiritual way for the glory of God and the benefit of the kingdom. And so this business acumen and the spiritual acumen, I'm tirelessly working, as Apostle Paul would say in Colossians 1:28, right? To present our brothers and sisters excellent before the throne of Christ, seeing that business acumen and spiritual acumen come together so that in neither place do they feel like they need to throttle back on that.
Man,
So
I
yeah,
love
that's
that.
what we're after.
I love that. For years, for 17 years, I was in that role as a church planter in a small rural church. I live in South Dakota, so I don't really need to put the rural in front of that. It's all rural out here. But, that's the problem when you said earlier, and I agree, so much of what the church does is not done well. It's not done with excellence. And probably one of the biggest reasons for that is the lack of resources, because our one source of funding, our whole strategy has been, we're taking an offering, our hands out, please give. And our resources are pretty limited, versus if we put that mission into the hands of people out in the business community, there's much deeper pockets. You said sustainable. That was a word I wrote down early on in this conversation. Like, it's a much more sustainable form of funding. I'm not opposed to offering and giving. I think it's biblical, and I could preach a sermon right now. But if that's our only source of funding for this stuff, and then furthermore, much of the time that funding comes from the business community and is put in the hands of church leadership that is not always the most strategic in its business acumen. So it's not always necessarily handled the best. So we could dissect that. We could spend a whole podcast episode talking about why the church doesn't always lead so well with some of that. But man, I love your vision for this. Look, I don't want to take too much of your time, so we need to start kind of running for the runway here on this and landing this plane. But speak to the pastor, maybe for two different angles. We've got largely pastors in our community listening to this. So there's that one pastor who is really in need of some income for themselves. And our message has been, man, get out in the marketplace. Turns out there's a lot of unsaved people who need Jesus out there that aren't coming through your door Monday through Saturday, or Sunday. So go reach them and make some money while you do it. So maybe I want you to encourage that pastor. Like, what word of encouragement would you offer to that pastor who themselves are looking at being out in the marketplace? And then also speak to the pastors, because I know a few already that when this airs, I'm going to directly link them to this episode where you got to hear this guy, because I know a few pastors that would love to do something similar to what you are doing, or maybe even working on it in their local context. So speak to that pastor that is maybe considering engaging the business community, the marketplace a little bit more. What would you say to encourage them? So does that make sense, kind of speaking to those two different profiles of pastors?
Yes, absolutely. In the first case, as far as pastors kind of thinking and putting action behind that thought, moving out of the silo of just what we do in the church, and specifically for those that possibly might be in a situation where they do need a greater revenue stream, whether that's for the needs here and now or for preparation for retirement. And I could spend a whole podcast on what I think about retirement. I don't mean quitting, but maybe being able to give some different time in a different way where it's not monetized as much in the future, right? We need to be saving and preparing for that. However, I've done this long enough to know, over 3 decades in the local church, that for the most part, it does not take the time that we often give to office hours in the church to get done what we actually need to get done.
Thank you.
And there's a lot I do with my staff quite often, time studies and marginal time studies, just to see how much margin do we have, and then to be able to attack that and say, okay, what could we do with that margin that's better for the kingdom, better for my family, better for my church. But then in regards to this question, that might actually take that time and be able to monetize it for something else. I would encourage leaders to think about other ways that they are gifted, or other skill sets that they have, or that they're developing, or that they have never developed and always wanted to develop. It's like, get active on those things. And just dip your toe in the water, take a Peter moment and step out of the boat.
Amen.
Trust Jesus with it and see what happens. And, money's not evil. The love of money is the root of all evil, not money. And all of the money in the world is God's, right?
Amen.
And so, the parable of the talents, what are we going to do with what he's entrusted One of the things I did personally, and it was a goal of mine, which did take some preparation because I had to have my doctorate in order to do it. But I did student ministry for years, and I always want to be investing in the next generation. Matter of fact, it's one of our core values at Venture Church. And so I'm an adjunct professor at a university. I do it in the fall semester once a year. Which really cool opportunity this year. I was just asked by the business side. I've been in the Old Testament religious side of things. The business school is now saying we want to launch a class on business and faith. Would you be interested in building that? Right? I'm like, yes, I would love to. But it doesn't have to be that. It's whatever the lane that you were naturally or supernaturally gifted by God to run in. Carve some time out for that. And I have said to leaders, look, if your church leadership doesn't embrace that, maybe you need to find another church. That's blunt, but I deeply feel that way. And I don't think it's, it doesn't have to be a fight and all that. I believe in casting vision, bringing people alongside with this bigger picture that, hello, the kingdom of God is bigger than what we do on Sundays. Yeah. And so God's inviting us into that. Let's figure out how we can step into it. But as well as I do, you're doing a podcast here. There are so many ways to launch different types of business, whether it's technology or whatever, in these times of margin. That takes time, but is not going to steal away from who we are and what we do in the local church. So
that's great.
I think that's good. And so on the backside of your second question, what was the heart of that question again, John?
Basically, what would you say to that pastor that's wanting to do something similar in terms of just engaging the business community? Maybe they're not wanting to launch a business themselves per se, but wanting to have their church have a more active role in the marketplace, similar to some of the things you're doing. So what would you say to encourage them? How do they get started in that?
Yeah, I think for me, it's not a if, but a when. When are you going to do it? What I have come to learn is just taking that step of faith to start the conversation that begins to empower business men and women to leverage their influence in the marketplace. It's a win right out of the gate, just to start the conversations to say, I see what you're doing in our community is important. And I believe it's actually God's call, which is equal to my call, for your life to impact people. Let's start talking about how you can influence and impact people. And because here's the deal. Our people leave our church going, hey, great talk, dude, but what do I do with it this week? Yeah. Oh, you gave me 3 action steps, but how does that flesh itself out in business? And just creating those environments where those conversations can start happening, then it's like the floodgates open. It really is that easy. Once church leaders start networking with other business leaders, start with people in your church, all of a sudden you're going to be networked with people outside of your church. All of a sudden you're having bigger kingdom ideas that start coming to the table. You get to decide, is that for us or not? It actually points out the fact, as you said earlier, John, tithes and offerings aren't going to cover this.
Yeah.
Right. We have got to have larger revenue streams because this is a big ticket item over here. Tithes and offerings are keeping the lights on and helping us minister to the people that come to our church and care for them and shepherd them. That's great. But we need more money to get that done. That, as I have seen, just naturally starts happening. I went out and I joined a couple of the leadership groups. They're like, what's this pastor guy doing here? I want to get to know you. I want to know what you do. I want to know what your skill sets are. I want to know the real needs in our community so that we can start working together and not necessarily against each other intentionally. But let me just pause there. There are a lot of great businesses doing great things that wouldn't necessarily call them kingdom businesses. They wouldn't label themselves that. But we can partner with them to get great things.
Absolutely.
Which here's another way I would encourage that. It's so we have a rule here. Let's not reinvent what great nonprofits are already doing in our area. Let's get behind them. Okay. So part of venture business impact is I want to help nonprofits be successful because they've had a passion, a vision, a call, and then they get into the mix and the muck and the mire of it, and every single one of them ends up struggling with money issues and volunteer issues. And so they end up getting in this fundraising doom cycle loop that keeps them from really thriving in their calling, which they once had that started the nonprofit.
Yeah.
And so what I want to encourage church leaders to do is get to know your nonprofits, the good ones. Why do we have 57 food banks and within, 10 square miles? Well, it's because all of them are doing what's the good phrase?
Mediocre?
Yeah, thank you very much. Job at that. And so who do we get behind and champion and funnel our funds and leadership support into? So I would say to a leader that wants to engage in the for-profit businesses, engage in the nonprofits that you know in your area, and just start having conversations with them. And then just seek the Lord, right? Rally with the Spirit of God to say, okay, now that I begin to discover what's really going on underneath my nose, my circle of influence with this church, how can I then pour into that? Because commercial break here, I'm working on that with us, this with us as well, is we can do what we do every weekend and expect the culture to come to us, but they've already tapped out, right? We're not going to do that. So how do we identify the needs through, great research to see what's going on around our church so that we can leverage the business and the church collaborating together to bring impact to that. Short little snippet. One of the businesses that's in Venture Business Impact is a business I'm doing with a technology group where I want to identify all the kingdom businesses in my area, men or women that have said, our business is for the Lord. And then I want to identify all the nonprofits. And then I want to start to create revenue streams by building a partnership between the kingdom business and the nonprofits so that it's not all on the church. It's not all on the business, but we can know through a vetted sequence of what nonprofits in our area are actually getting the work done based on these needs. And if we don't have a nonprofit tackling it, we can launch one and then fund it through these kingdom businesses. Our poster child for VBI is a home improvement company over in the Dallas area. In 2021, 2022, gave away $200,000 of profit to nonprofits they had already bidded.
Man, I love that.
So that's one business. If we can have 100 we could easily be dealing with a multi-million-dollar budget every year, right? Wow. Or we're able to invest. So I would just encourage pastors, leaders at all levels in the organization to get involved in those. Go to the Rotary Club meetings, right? Meet people, the movers and the shakers, so to speak, in the community. We're not trying to win them to the church. We're trying to learn how to collaborate and work together.
Scott, go ahead.
Can I do one final there? But on the other side, I'm not the only guy thinking through this, but I'm glad to connect with in person or online with anybody that says, oh, but wait a minute. I actually do kind of have a flair in me to start thinking through what would it look like for me to help leaders in our church start businesses or rethink their business from a coaching perspective to start thinking, how do I reposition or reallocate some of our revenue and our earnings towards some things that are going on in our community or around the world that lets me be a part with my business to this bigger work of the Lord. I'd love to have those conversations with people as well.
Yeah, well, I would love to connect people to you. I've got friends in Kellar, Texas. The next time I'm down there, I'm looking you up, man. And if other people wanted to check you out or more about what you guys have going on, what's the best way for them to connect with you online?
Yeah, so a couple of different ways. Venturebusinesssimpact.org is the VBI website. That's a mouthful, venturebusinesssimpact.org. I have an email on there. I can be reached there as well. Of course, LinkedIn is a way to do that as well. If you want to find me on there, a direct email to me is scott@venturechurch.net. That's just a quick, straight path. And, that's a starter. I am willing and will give my cell out to anyone who needs it as well and wants to get going in that type of conversation. So send it my way. That'd be great.
I love it. Like I said, Scott, I knew this was going to be a fun conversation. I've been looking forward to it. I love what you're doing, love your vision and your heart. And I acknowledge what you just said. This isn't just you. I mean, you're not the only one in this. But man, when a pastor takes the lead on that, when a pastor is willing to go there and have that conversation, it's cool to see how people follow that leadership and respond to that leadership and stuff gets done. And so I love seeing that willingness in the heart of a spiritual leader, a church leader, to say, man, let's go here. And it's really cool. I think you guys are just getting started. I know you know this, but you're just getting started on the stuff that's coming down the pipe. And I'm excited to stay connected to you and kind of watch all of this unfold. So, man, thanks for pouring into this community. And I'm grateful for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Privilege. I love, chatting and just sharing what we're learning along the way. And thank you for what you've shared today and how you've sharpened me as well.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the Entre Pastors Podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the Entre Pastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our Entre Pastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own Entre Pastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at entrepastors.com and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.